Hello everyone. We're doing something a little different today. I was sent an article on Twitter and I want to talk about it here along with how it pertains to science more broadly. So let's jump right in. Today we're looking at a study that was graciously given to me by Eric Manning on Twitter to start a conversation about the scientific method and epistemology. The article is the 2015 editorial, Lourdes, a uniquely Catholic approach to medicine, published in the Linacre Quarterly, which describes itself thus, quote, continuously published since 1934, Linacre Quarterly is the oldest journal dedicated to medical ethics in existence. It explores issues at the nexus of medicine and religion and highlights medical topics that have an ethical dimension. A peer-reviewed journal, Linacre Quarterly amplifies the Catholic Medical Association's efforts to inform, educate, and engage our members and the wider community, close quote. The paper in question has been cited exactly once in its 7 years of existence. That citation was just a survey that religious physicians are more likely to perceive a positive link between religion and their patients' mental health. Anyway, to give you an idea of what this 4-page paper is about, I'll directly quote the lay summary. Quote, Lourdes is a pilgrimage site in southern France that has been associated with medical miracles for the past 150 years. The site is unique in that throughout its history, physicians of any or no faith have been invited to participate in the proceedings of the investigations of each claimed cure. The investigations have formalized into a process handled by the Lourdes Medical Bureau and the Lourdes International Medical Association. Travis DeCozo, an American medical student, writes about his experiences as part of this process, close quote. Okay, so the paper is about a medical student, Travis DeCozo, in Lourdes, France, documenting his experiences with the Lourdes Medical Bureau. Lourdes first became associated with miracles when an apparition of the Virgin Mary supposedly appeared 18 times to a young girl named Bernadette Soubirous there in 1858. Shortly thereafter, claims of miraculous cures started pouring out of the site. Specifically, people claim to have bathed in the spring water at the grotto of Massabielle, which is an exposed cave in the city, and then been cured of their afflictions. Decades of this sort of thing went on, and in 1905, Pope Pius X pushed for the creation of the Lourdes Medical Bureau to investigate these miracle claims and determine which ones are real. The Lourdes Medical Bureau then passes the most interesting miracle claims along to the International Lourdes Medical Committee. Doctors on this committee then investigate every aspect of a claim, the diagnosis, potential treatments, pilgrimage to grotto, and the recovery to determine whether a case truly is inexplicable based on current medical knowledge. In 1933, the Church canonized Bernadette as Saint Bernadette, and in 1943, 20th Century Fox made a movie about it that was very entertaining and referential. Travis states in the paper that the committee utilizes the Lambertini criteria in their investigations. What are the Lambertini criteria, you ask? Well, there are no peer-reviewed articles about it on Google Scholar, and Wikipedia has no pages dedicated to it. There aren't even other papers about the Lambertini criteria in the Linacre Quarterly. Travis says, quote, according to the Lambertini criteria, the disease must be serious and impossible to cure by current human means, as well as not be in a stage liable to remission. The cure must be instantaneous, complete, permanent, and must not be preceded by treatment to which the cure could be attributed, close quote. This is the first issue I have with the article. The Lambertini criteria aren't methodologically rigorous. They were a convention invented by Cardinal Prospero Lambertini, later Pope Benedict XIV, between 1734 and 1738. Let's think about those first criteria for just a moment. The disease must be serious and impossible to cure by human means. Serious is subjective. There is no objective method for determining when a disease is serious. And what about impossible to cure by current human means? Just because we don't know how a disease went into remission, that doesn't, on its own, mean the person was miraculously cured. And if we agree that's the case, how could we differentiate between a disease that went into spontaneous remission naturally and one induced by God? If, hypothetically, all that is required for some disease to go into spontaneous remission is that a single proton be moved, then how could we tell whether that proton was moved naturally or by God? There is no probability of remission that means God was necessarily involved. No matter how small the probability is, a non-zero probability means remission is theoretically possible. I think that these two issues shut down this discussion on their own. Notice that I don't have to disagree with the assessments made by the International Lourdes Medical Committee for these points to be true. It can be entirely true that a serious disease incurable on current methods went into remission following a bathe in the grotto. Does that therefore necessarily mean God was involved? I don't think even most theists would answer affirmatively. So we've danced around it long enough, let's take a critical look at the alleged miracle cures at Lourdes. The 2012 paper, The Lourdes Medical Cures Revisited, does exactly this. The paper states, quote, "The word cure has been in the Lourdes context misconstrued and overused. Allegations of cures, mere improvements in patients' medical status, especially in functional nervous conditions, were often accepted as genuine cures. By cross-checking available data, we arrived at a rough estimate of the medical events acknowledged as cures as 4,516 in the period of 1858 to 1976. Most of these cures occurred before World War II and were based on rather flimsy evidence collected in a unique environment, one-time observations of alleged cures and improvements, a context of pious crowds eager for miracles, and the absence of follow-ups, a flaw that has weighed down Lourdes medical history. It is therefore not feasible to assess the number of genuine cures that occurred before 1947. There has been a steady, exponential decline in the number of cures over the last 100 years." Close quote. The paper says further, quote, "Much has changed since the decades following the visions, at a time when records were crude or non-existent, subjectivity and complacency were the rule, an allegation of cure was synonymous with cure, and medicine had no accurate diagnostic tools and lacked effective treatments." Close quote. The number of cures has dropped so much that from 1991 to 2006, when the study ended, not a single cure was registered by the committee. Almost as though the more information we have about a person's ailments, the less likely it seems they were cured by bathing in miracle water. The paper says there are likely two reasons for the number of so-called cures decreasing. People are more likely to go to actual doctors, and the Lambertini criteria themselves have actually added some difficulty to assessing the cures. For example, if someone bathes in the grotto and goes into remission weeks, months, or possibly years later, does that negate the spontaneous criterion? How soon after bathing in the grotto does remission have to occur for it to be considered spontaneous? For reasons like this, the Lambertini criteria appear to have been largely abandoned or at the very least dramatically revised. As Dr. Patrick Tellier wrote in 2009, quote, "We physicians have been freed of Lambertini's criteria," close quote. The paper continues, quote, "The Lourdes cures have been praeter naturam, beyond the natural course of nature, not contra naturam, contrary to nature, breaking a natural law. Thus, a case of pulmonary tuberculosis, initially considered incurable, but which was nonetheless cured at Lourdes, is praeter naturam, whereas the growth of a new limb after amputation, an impossible achievement in the human species, would be contra naturam," close quote. According to the paper, a grand total of 3 cures are claimed to be contra naturam, a non-surgical correction of clubfoot in 1896, and spontaneous lengthening of lower limbs in 1891 and 1892. Of course, these events occurred so far in the past that we have no way of verifying what actually happened. That they could only peg 3 cases over so many years brings to mind the withering comment the novelist Anatole France made about what signs of miraculous healings he should found left at Lourdes, and which he did not. Quote, "So many crutches and no wooden legs," close quote. Another problem is that physicians in charge of the Bureau have a major conflict of interest. Gustave Boissary headed the Bureau from 1891 to 1917 during the so-called Golden Age of Lourdes. French surgeon Alexis Carrel wrote of Boissary, quote, "Mr. Boissary has published several books about the cures. He has written these books as if he were a priest and not a physician, and pious considerations were a substitute for observations. No rigorous analysis, no precise deduction. These books have been bestsellers, but have remained restricted to the faithful and have certainly no scientific value," close quote. Ironically, Carroll was himself later convinced that the grotto had miraculous powers when he bore witness to what he considered an inexplicable healing. To make matters worse, Boissari wrote, quote, "We want to remind those who read us that the reports we released for the public only contain the depositions collected from patients and certificates often inadequate of their physicians. We have neither the means of checking patients' declarations nor the opportunity of an independent inquiry. There are facts of unequal value in our recordings of the cures. Gathering evidence will come later." Close quote. Ultimately, the paper concludes, quote, "From the pragmatic standpoint of an agnostic, the Lourdes cures, fewer than originally thought, have been a heterogeneous collection of medical facts, neither impostures nor miracles." Close quote. So while it may indeed be the case that some individuals experienced unusual remission for their disease, there is no evidence to support supernatural intervention in any of these cases. And even if there had been, scientific methods could not determine it. As Travis DeCozo points out, quote, "The Bureau follows the Lambertini criteria to declare if a cure or spontaneous remission associated with Lourdes is medically unexplainable according to current medical knowledge. It is up to the bishops of the diocese of the person who is healed to declare whether it is a case of a miracle or not." Close quote. It's not the job of science to determine whether something is supernatural. It is only the job of science to determine how something could occur within a naturalist framework. If some phenomenon is truly inexplicable on current data, then the very best a scientist can say is, "We simply don't understand this phenomenon at this time." That doesn't mean it was miraculous, that just means we don't understand it now. I want to end this discussion for now with one more paper, the 2022 3 Cases of Hearing Impairment with Surprising Subjective Improvements After Prayer. What can we say when analyzing them? This paper documents 3 cases of self-reported improvements in hearing after prayer. Self-reported is important to note because all 3 individuals had their hearing tested in a variety of manners, but audiological tests found no measurable improvements in hearing. The researchers go out of their way to avoid trying to explain this phenomenon in medical terms, even calling the enterprise rude. However, they eventually do suggest that a combination of psychological and neurological processes could contribute to these diagnoses. My point in referencing this study is that even when someone claims to feel improved as a result of prayer, there won't necessarily be objective evidence to validate that conclusion, making reporting cures that much more difficult. In closing, I don't see good evidence for invoking a divine intervention at Lourdes. It appears that the cases presented, even those that are currently inexplicable, are remarkable, not miraculous. A combination of poorly documented cases, religious zealotry to declare patients instantaneously cured, and progressively decreasing number of alleged cures as medical science improves seem to indicate natural, not supernatural, phenomena. So, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.